2000, the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, Kofi Annan, developed a set of 10 principles which he wanted to be voluntary guidelines for businesses, for non-government organizations, and for governments. And so he set out these 10 principles. I'll just review them briefly. The first two have to do with human rights, that businesses and all organizations should support and protect internationally proclaimed human rights, which are all spelled out in the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and make sure they're not complicit in rights abuses. And there are lots of examples of that. If you think about South Africa during the apartheid era, one of the questions, should companies stay there even though they weren't doing anything really very wrong, but were they complicit in the human rights abuses that occurred during that apartheid era? And so there were a number of challenges to particularly U.S. companies who were operating in South Africa at the time. And there are numerous other examples that we can think of. The second set of principles has to do with labor standards. And these will seem obvious to anyone in the United States, but they're not so obvious if you work in other countries. Businesses should uphold the freedom of association. That means the right to collectively bargain and form unions. They should eliminate all forms of forced and compulsory labor and eliminate child labor. But in many countries in the world, children at the ages as young as 5 will be working, sometimes to support their families. And for those of you who play soccer, soccer balls are made by 12-year-olds because their hands are small and they can do the right weaving of the soccer balls. So if you love soccer, perhaps there's another way to think about this. In some companies that make soccer balls now, the children also go to school, so that there's some work on that. And then the elimination of discrimination in employment. We've worked awfully hard in the United States with that. But in many countries in the world, women are discriminated against. People who are foreigners often have problems. People who are of another color than the people in that country, or another religious or ethnic background, have terrible times in the workplace. So you can see why he developed these principles. And then, of course, the principles of the environment that companies should undertake to promote greater environmental responsibility and encourage environmentally friendly technologies. These principles are sometimes harder for business to do because they are entrenched in processes and manufacturing processes that they've been doing for centuries. And new technologies are always very expensive. So companies have not always done as well on those principles than on the others. And finally, then, the anti-corruption principle, that they should work against bribery and extortion in whatever country they're operating in. That, again, seems so obvious to Americans, but the only way you can do business in a number of countries in the world is by paying some bribes. For example, in Egypt, the only way you can get any of your cargo off the ship is to make sure some money passes into the hands of the people working there. You can't get a driver's license in India without 2 or 3 well-put bits of money, rupees, to get in order to get your driver's license. These are small things, but of course they become larger and larger. So these principles are voluntary. They have not obviously been adopted by all businesses, nor by all non-government organizations, nor by governments, but they have a long list of signatures, and not every signatory up to these principles actually is able to embrace them all or to operationalize them all, but they're very interesting. I would call them ideals. They're things that all companies should work for, all countries should work for, and of course those of us who work with the United Nations are hoping that that will be the case. Now,